we present the urgent messages given to Veronica Lucan by the Blessed Mother and our Lord Jesus Christ at Our Lady of the Roses Shrine, Bayside, New York. At the heart of the Bayside story is Veronica Lucan. She is the seer of Our Lady of the Roses, Mary Help of Mothers Shrine, whom the Eternal Father has chosen to bring his messages to the world. Veronica is a voice box for heaven, whose mission is to repeat verbatim the messages given through her by our Lord and Our Lady. In 1968, St. Teresa the Little Flower appeared to Veronica in her home, giving her poems and sacred writings by dictation. This paved the way for Our Lady's first appearance to Veronica on April 7th, 1970. The Blessed Mother informed Veronica that she would appear on the grounds of St. Robert Bellarmine's Catholic Church in Bayside on June 18th, 1970. The Blessed Mother requested that vigils of prayer and processions be held on all the great Catholic feast days. Our Lady requested that a shrine and basilica be erected on this, her chosen sacred site, which she has titled Our Lady of the Roses, Mary Help of Mothers. These vigils of prayer have continued since 1970 at Our Lady's request. The vigils have temporarily been relocated to the Vatican Pavilion site in Flushing Meadows Park, Queens, New York.
The New Babel, Illiterates or Duped, a Biblical Expose. Now, accompanying the infant and adult sacrament of baptism of the Spirit, there was a phenomenon which occurred in the early church, speaking in tongues. But you will notice that on Pentecost Sunday, these tongues were known, spoken, everyday languages. And when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded in mind, because that every man heard them speaking in his own tongue. And they were all amazed and wondered, saying, Behold, are not all these that speak Galileans? And how have we heard every man our own tongue wherein we were born? Acts 2, 6-8. So the mouthing of unknown tongues, so popular today, is not in line with Scriptures. This becomes more evident when we pose the question, why the gift of tongues to begin with? This is answered in the same chapter of Acts, Acts 2:41, in that there were added to the church on Pentecost about 3,000 souls. In ancient times, communications between peoples of different languages was made almost impossible because so few were educated or could read or write. So little contact existed between nations because transportation was crude and highways risky. Many nations had not yet developed written languages which could be studied privately. Medias of communication between nations were limited to runners or beasts of burden. On top of this, and even more, add the fact that if one did learn to speak any other language besides his own native tongue, it was usually just Latin or Greek, the, quote, non-barbarian languages, unquote, as they were called by Julius Caesar. De bello Gallico. Still add on top of all of these that the only ones who ever learned a second tongue were the rich or noble families the only ones who ever received education, exempting here caravan merchants. Thus, to hear Galilean fishermen speak foreign languages was a monumental shock. Behold, are not all these that speak Galileans? Acts 2:7. So this became a necessary work tool for God to add members to the newborn church. Acts 2:41. As a matter of fact, this manifestation, this phenomenon, this gift of speaking languages of other nations served a secondary function as a work tool of the early church. The unbelievers used it as a sign of the one true faith and immediately sought baptism, as St. Paul states, "In the law it is written, in other tongues and other lips I will speak to this people, and neither so will they hear me, saith the Lord. Wherefore tongues are for a sign not to believers, but to unbelievers." 1 Corinthians 14:21-22. Nevertheless, this work tool in the primitive church of being able to speak, quote, in all your tongues, unquote, of the day, 1 Corinthians 14:18, was considered to be a gift of a lower order, as it did not help the infidel who was able to understand the language. He needed to understand the words of life. I thank my God, I speak with all your tongues. But in the church I had rather speak 5 words with my understanding, that I may instruct others also, than 10,000 words in a tongue. 1 Corinthians 14:18-19. Are all workers of miracles? Have all the grace of healing? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? But be zealous for the better gifts. 1 Corinthians 12:30-31. Here, Scriptures clearly tells us that we should not seek the gift of tongues, as there are better gifts we must seek. In other words, the knowledge of this world must pass, and we must not seek the imperfect gift of tongues. Charity never falleth away. Tongues shall cease. 1 Corinthians 13:8. Those people who seek today the speaking in tongues must give serious consideration to this biblical verse, touching upon the temporary nature of such worldliness. Now, Paul is displeased with the Corinthians because they have misunderstood this primitive work tool so needed in the early church to convert the world, and perverted it into a spiritual high. Therefore, St. Paul found it necessary to criticize the assemblies and meetings of these primitive Christians who delighted in speaking in these known tongues. They totally ignored the infidels who came there to learn the faith, but knew nothing of these manifestations, tools, or its purpose. Which is worse, they were not being instructed in the faith. Thus, for he that speaketh in a tongue speaketh not unto men, but unto God. For no